I was born in Lahore. My father was a professor in Lahore, so we lived there during most of the winters, and my grandparents were in Kashmir, so we lived there most of the winters of the summers. The partition basically came rather suddenly. We were refugees. We had to basically run, but we had some place to go because from Lahore we went to Kashmir, where we felt we were very safe, and both my grandparents were there, and we had homes and everything else. But literally a couple of months later, the Pakistani raiders attacked Kashmir, and so within a couple of months we were refugees again, and this time we had to walk to Jammu, which was quite a trek, and my young mother and my little brother and myself basically arrived in Delhi after a long distance journey. But my father was a professor. We were not ordinary refugees. We were rather privileged. Fairly soon after that, my father became a diplomat, and the next 20 odd years we spent overseas. My schooling was almost all of it in Europe and America, and of course, basically the early schooling was in England. My science came from schools in England and college. I went to Cambridge, where I did my degree in natural sciences, which I had wonderful experiences as a scientist. I did my PhD at Harvard in physics. I got home to India at the age of 31. So my Hindi wasn't very strong, and I was basically a Dheet. I needed to be an Indian. I didn't. Deep down in my DNA was India. And to tell you the truth, I basically spent my entire educational life trying to learn all the things I would need if I was a good Indian citizen. So I spent a lot of time in not just science, but in economics and social sciences and business methods and operations research and economics. All the while doing my degrees, I basically wanted to be able, when I get back home, to be able to contribute to nation building. And I came home in 1971. Mrs. Indira Gandhi asked me to set up the Agency for Environment. It was called the Office of Environmental Planning. And I became the head of that agency and ran it for about 5 years. It was a part of the Ministry of Science and Technology. So it was an incredibly powerful time of my life because we reported directly to the Prime Minister. She was the Minister of Environment, Science and Technology. And she was very supportive because she, unlike most political leaders, really had a very deep commitment to a better future. In June 1972 was the Stockholm conference. So I was involved with the government just before that to set up our participation. And she, of course, played a major role in that. She was the only head of state, other than the host, Prime Minister Olof Palme in Sweden. And we had a terrific impact on global thinking about environment. And it was not just about pollution and poisoning of chemicals and so on, but it was much bigger than that in the sense of leaving a legacy for the future of a planet that can be very healthy. So very quickly, early in the 70s, we were able to use that position and, how would you say, situation of having terrific support from above and a great deal of insight from the field, because India's environmental problems were very different. They were forestry and soils and disappearing rivers, and the environmental problems of a poor country are completely different from those of Europe or North America. And as a consequence, we learned a great deal about the bigger picture of how environment and development were so closely related, how both were actually so intertwined that one could cause the other negative impacts, but one could be the only solution to the other in terms of positive outcomes. Almost all the early environmental policies of India were at that time done by a group of us. And essentially it became ready to become a ministry just about mid-70s. At that point, I got seduced into going into the UN system to help set up the environment program for the UN in Nairobi. The first headquarters in a third world country. It was a terrific experience to set up a UN agency to look at issues that every single agency had to contribute in some ways to. Just as we had learned in the Indian context that environment wasn't something that was a sector. It had to permeate the thinking of every sector there is. And our job basically became how to educate ministers and ministries about what the impacts of their work were and how they should be. So we did, in Nairobi, we were basically charged with doing this on a global scale. My particular job in Nairobi actually turned out to be an ambassador for the environment. So I was packed off on an airplane and sent around 100-odd countries, 110 to be precise, to persuade governments that they ought to set up environmental agencies, mechanisms, ministries, research organizations, databases. It was nice. It was, as I say, a very confidence-building exercise, but I really needed to be in India. So once again, for a second time, I packed up my bags and came home and started the organization that I'm still working in for after 35 years, called Development Alternatives. It was actually a very strange time because during these 3 or 4 years, from 80 to 84, many incredible organizations came up, mushroomed in this country, including yours, including Gram Vikas, including Priya, including even CSE, a whole bunch of them. And they are still there. And very little new has happened since then. Helix. And my DNA had two strands, which were an extreme feeling of outrage, an extreme feeling of unacceptability of the poverty that I saw around me in my country. And indeed around the world, because I've been around everywhere, but particularly in India. And the massive destruction of the resource base on which that poverty was going to have to be, eliminated and didn't exist. Water, and as I say, soils, and rivers, and forests. I'm a gadget person, so I got lots of things when I came back from Nairobi on my transfer of residence, including one of the first PCs in the world. Had no hard disk, it was 4K memory. I mean, we had to load DOS first. There was no Windows or anything else. And then WordStar, and then, it was antediluvian. I had more than a dozen terrific top-level graduates from the IITs, and they were terrifically creative. They developed a whole bunch of machines for textiles, for water, for cooking, and all kinds of things. So we became very quickly a major league innovator. Now, when I left Nairobi, I had been to the head of the UN organization I worked for, UNEP, to say I'm going home. This was Mustafa Tolba, a giant of a man. I mean, he probably, other than Maurice Strong, had more influence in our lives than almost anyone else. He was an Egyptian. He was a bit autocratic, but a brilliant mind. And to tell you the truth, I never got support like that. He didn't want me to go, but he did want to see this happen. I explained to him what I wanted to do, and he was really a wise person. He was terrific. And he said, wow, this I want to support. If you're going to go, we will make sure that you have 2 years. You come and finish your work here. For 2 years, I'll support you. You go around the world, make funding missions, do what you like, as well as do the work for the UN. But you have total freedom, and we will support you to start this. And so I came back with basically 3 ideas. So there's a triple helix in there too. One was that good science and management methods are critically important. The second was the combination of development and environment. That if you didn't take care of nature, there was no real chance that nature would be able to take care of you. So to some extent, we were really deeply involved right from the beginning to bring the nexus between poverty and conservation, poverty and nature, right to the top. And the third was that you needed to combine the strengths of civil society, the strengths, the social commitment to social justice that NGOs have, voluntary agencies have, with the efficiencies and the ability to deliver results of business. And I called it, at that time I called it a development venture. Now everybody calls it a social enterprise. But DA was actually the first social enterprise. It had a model, a business model, that we felt had the chance of not only developing good methods, good models of development, but getting them out on scale. And you needed both the social and the environmental commitment on the one hand, and you needed the hard-headed ability of a businessman to deliver on the other. If people say, you know, where did you make a difference? Yeah, I could say chulas, water harvesting structures. And I would say probably the biggest area for us became affordable, low cost, but elegant housing for rural India, using local natural materials and so on. But that is not the point. We had a model, a engine for innovation that could deal not only with these, but with sanitation, with energy, with everything else that people need, all basic needs, particularly jobs, particularly livelihoods. But where we really made a difference was in the attitudinal and the methodological basis, the platform for innovation and delivering innovation. And there I think we really made an impact because very few people were able to achieve that. It was not easy because, you know, the genes of an NGO are very different from those of a business, and the same people can't work in both areas. So we really had to learn how to divide the functions and so on in such a way that the people who were suited to do this did that. The country needs 250, 300 million jobs. You can do 1,000 or 2,000. You know, there's just no way you can even scratch the surface. Whereas our approach, as indeed the kind of approach that you tried, Vijay, in microcredit, was to find multipliers, to find ways in which you catalyze large-scale work by all kinds of other people. So partnerships was a very important part of our system. That's how, you know, Hindi is Indian languages, Indic languages are quite remarkable because they're the only languages in the world that have a tense called the causative. It's a verb form which is called the causative. And in our organization, we adopted that as a great advantage. So you see, if you make something, banana, you can only make so many. But if you do banwana, you can multiply huge quantities. And our whole way of thinking is getting people to do work for us or for themselves. So the whole difference between our approach and everybody else is that we don't do banana, we do banwana. But in order to do Banwana, you have to banao first, something to demonstrate. So we do all that. But it is on the basis of Banwana that we actually have had our impact, where partners, NGO partners mainly, but small enterprises, local governments, they all basically become amplifiers. With local governments, a lot of things. We have a very good community radio in Bundelkhand. It's called Radio Bundelkhand, with which we can communicate very well, particularly with local governments, panchayats and sarpanches and people. But we also work a lot with them. We give them a lot. You know, we learned very early that the more you give, the more you get. So we basically supply advice and help and so on to local governments a lot. But our biggest partners are NGOs. And so there are three kinds. There's the business kind, there's the local government type, and then there's the NGOs. Now the NGOs we work with are for project-driven stuff mostly. For example, we have now trained 220,000, nearly 250,000 women how to read and write. It's an incredible program, very, very sophisticated, but it works beautifully. And in 56 days, a woman can learn to read and write Hindi. And we do that in partnership with local NGOs. So we were able basically to build up our operations on public money, but not from government, Indian government. This is okay. I mean, we managed to do a fair amount with whatever we could. If you skip 20 years and you come to today, where NGOs generally, civil society generally, is in deep trouble. I mean, there are virtually no sources of funding now available for doing anything creative. If you go out there and do hack work, you might get some support. CSR money from corporates, service-oriented money from government is all going to hack work. There's nothing innovative about it. I was reviewing the other evening, sitting there in my study, thinking, you know, supposing I try to do what we do here in, say, Singapore. I believe it would have taken about 8 or 10 years to do what we've done in 35. Because the attitude of the support systems, government and business and everything, is that if it's good for the country, it's good for me. It's a privilege to support you. It's a privilege. Whenever I work in Singapore, I get incredible positive support because I'm doing something that is of value to the country. And nobody ever finds a way of tripping you up. They're not looking for you. Here, it's the exact opposite. I've spent 35 years falling down and being picked out, or picking myself up from banana peels. Because whether you're talking to income tax, whether you're talking to FCRA, whether you're talking to government, whether you're talking to state ministries, all of them basically feel that it is an imposition to have anybody do something good for the country. I don't know what to do about that attitude. I think one of the problems we have to solve is to change that attitude. And I think only civil society can do that. The urge to revive the natural assets of a country that was so rich that the whole world was looking. The Marco Polos and the Vasco da Gamas and the Columbuses, they were all coming here for our wealth. And that wealth was natural wealth. And we've lost it all. So our single-minded investment now has to be in regenerating that asset, which God gave us a lot of, and we've pretty well destroyed, and we're continuing to destroy. Things that need to be done are basically speed and scale. To me, there are not many new things that need to be thought of, new technologies. And sure, they'll always come along, solar this and that. There are millions of improvements we can make. But we already have the means to make every human being in our country well enough off that they feel that they're dignified citizens of a great country. We're not getting it there. There's 600 or 700 million, maybe 800 million, who are outside the economy, do not feel that their lives are as good as they should be. Speed and scale require different kinds of mechanisms from the way things are. Speed means that everybody is contributing. And scale doesn't mean scale in terms of large size, large dams, large roads, large airports, large ports, large. It means scaling out. It means often decentralized, local, and very, very powerfully designed support systems. And the scale and speed need new kinds of institutions. And I think social enterprises is one of those. Certainly not the only one, but the one that I know and familiar with and spent my whole life trying to build is one which thinks that profits are good, but human profits, human scale profits. And profits are no good if they are countermanded by negative impacts on the environment and on people and so on. So you've got to bring all three together, economics, social, society, and nature, that nurture a Gandhian future. You know, Gandhi, he was very perceptive. In my opinion, he was one of the earliest and greatest ecologists. He really understood the relationship between man and nature. He was terrific at understanding economics, as if life mattered. And his insight into structures, decentralized, small, doing things at the lowest possible level of society, are the only solutions.